squat, bench, deadlift. The big three. Now, these are great movements that I think most people should include in their training program, but they certainly have disadvantages and issues that it's important to be aware of. I'm not fear-mongering here at all. These are just some issues with these movements. So in this video, we're going to talk about the disadvantages. We're going to talk about some modifications that you might make to them to make them better, as well as potential other movements to replace them if necessary, to help you keep getting those gains. Let's start with the deadlift. And one of the primary criticisms of using the deadlift for hypertrophy is that it stresses the lower back spinal erectors more compared to other muscle groups. And I would say overall this is true, but you don't really hear this with other movements, do you? How often do you hear the bench press works the chest way more than the other muscle groups involved? The squat works the quads or the lower back way more than other muscle groups involved. It is true, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, nor is it particularly avoidable. Any compound movement is going to be working some area more than others. It's just part of using these types of movements. Another criticism is that it causes a lot of systemic stress. So it's causing total body fatigue rather than just targeting one particular area. So instead of doing a deadlift, the rationale is if you want to improve your hamstrings, you can just do hamstring curls and target that area much more effectively. This is absolutely true. Again, with any compound movement, you can almost certainly think of some isolation variation that can target that area more effectively with less overall fatigue and stress. However, that doesn't make the compound movement a bad movement for any of the muscle groups involved with a deadlift. Lats, traps, forearms, hands, spinal erectors, glutes, adductors, hamstrings, quads, calves, feet, all this stuff that is working together to move the weight and to stabilize the entire system in space to make sure that you don't snap your shit up. Yes, there's some isolation variation that can target any of those areas more effectively, but that doesn't mean that the compound movement is useless. And so yes, if you are a high-level bodybuilder and you want to bring up a specific area, probably the deadlift is not going to be what does it, with maybe the exception of the spinal erectors. But for, someone has lagging glutes or lagging hamstrings, my first thought is not deadlifts. It's something else, something more surgical to get in there and get the job done. Another issue is grip for some people. If you can't double overhand it, some people are afraid of a mixed grip. And, even though the risk of tearing a biceps is incredibly low, especially if you're natural, it is a risk, and, you can use straps if necessary. So I don't think this is really a justified criticism because it's very easy to use straps. Finally, a lot of people criticize this for the risk of injury. But if you use good technique, you're not maxing out all the time, you are mindful of your positions, etc., the risk of a deadlift is incredibly low, even for the lower back. Lower back pain is the #1 cause of missed work in the United States, costing billions upon billions of dollars each year.
Hello, Peter. What's happening? We have sort of a problem here. Yeah, you apparently
Haven't been deadlifting? I've actually checked your training log.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry about that. I forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to make up for that, you're going to need to be doing some German volume training.
Did you see the memo about this?
Yeah. Yeah, I have the memo right here. I just forgot. But it's not shipping out till tomorrow, so there's no problem.
Yeah. If you could just go ahead and make sure you do that from now on, that would be great. And I'll go ahead and make sure you get another copy of that memo. Okay?
Yeah, no, I have the memo. I've got it. It's right.
Hello, Phil. What's happening?
How much of that is from deadlifting? Almost none. How much of that could be prevented by more people deadlifting? Probably quite a bit of it. Two more issues is one, mobility. Some people can't get in the correct positions or their technique is not good. There's lots of free resources online to help you with your technique. You can videotape yourself. You can get an online coach. There are lots of ways to improve your technique. Another criticism is because it is working a lot of musculature in the lower body and in the back. Do you put it on a leg day or on a pull day? Is it a back movement or a lower body movement? And this can make it a little bit difficult to program.
Now that's a bit of a problem.
Next up, we have the competition style barbell bench press. This is typically done with a fairly wide grip and a reduced range of motion. And that is probably the biggest issue from a hypertrophy standpoint. Because you're reducing the range of motion, you're getting ultra leverage. That reduced range of motion puts less stress on the pecs. And I would say if you take less of an arch, that can help you to get better development. Next, we have injuries. Now, the first are pec tears. You might see a pec tear compilation all on flat barbell bench press. Well, there's a few reasons for this. First, it's a very popular movement. So the more people doing a movement, the more you're going to have these long compilations. Second, it does put a lot of stretch on the tendons on that muscle in the bottom position, which is where it is most liable to actually tear. Third, you don't see all the instances where no one teared a pec. Someone just compiles, the few more morbid, horrific instances of someone actually tearing a pec, and therefore you think it's super common. It is not. Weightlifting is incredibly safe. No matter how much people try to fearmonger, it's not. The statistics don't lie. It's extremely safe. Finally, elbows and shoulders tend to get issues, occasionally wrists as well, rotator cuff, etc. But there are definitely ways to work around this, as I will go into later. Finally, the last criticism that I hear is that because your scapula is pinned against the bench press, unlike a push-up, it cannot move freely, and therefore it is tougher on the body. This is definitely true, and this is why I think including push-ups, even weighted push-ups, in your training is a good idea. Next up, we have the squat. Now, the first criticism that I hear quite a bit is that it loads the spine. Dun, dun, dun! That's not necessarily all that bad of a thing, but it is important to maintain good technique, learn good positioning, as well as bracing, especially of the lower back, the abdomen. This is essential. You don't necessarily need to use a belt, but you do need to learn how to keep that area tight, snug, secure, locked in, braced, etc. Next, some people say that it is hard on the knees, or like the knees can't go over the toes, or like every time you squat, you're just shredding your knees, or like see you at the orthopedist, that kind of thing. Well, it depends on a lot of factors, but the squat itself is actually very, very knee friendly. As you would think, it's a very, very natural movement, and as long as you progress reasonably, gradually, you progressively overload in an intelligent and reasonable way, there is very little risk to this movement. I would say out of the big three, the squat is probably the least injurious. Another criticism is that especially in a low bar position, because you're just pinned back here, it does put stress potentially on the wrists, on the elbows, on the shoulders. And if you look at a lot of powerlifters, actually they do high bar in the off season. So when they're not prepping for a competition, they might move the bar back up in order to work more quads and to save the upper body joints for bench pressing. Another criticism is that they work the lower back more than the legs. And this depends on your technique. If you're just good morninging every single rep, sure, it might be more of a lower back spinal erector movement compared to a lower body movement. But this is a choice. This might be from going too heavy. This might just be from having bad technique or your leverages. But overall, it's still a choice. And if you stay more upright and you focus on the legs and you let the knees go forward, it is an excellent leg movement. Not terrible, excellent. Finally, especially for a lot of beginners, they might not have the mobility to get into the correct positions, especially at the ankle and the hip. So you see a lot of beginners, especially with the barbell, they can't get into a deep position. They can't even get to parallel, let alone below parallel. So I would say, starting with a front squat, or even better, a goblet squat, keeping you more upright and allowing you to get in a better position, perhaps putting plates on your heels, getting squat shoes, that kind of thing, can alleviate this issue. But if you've been sitting all your life and not active, yes, you might need to work up to a full barbell back squat. Okay, now let's jump back to deadlifts. Good video structure, I know. Nice work, editor.
Oh, fuck you.
It's me, by the way. I'm the editor for the people wondering.
You piece of shit.
So for the deadlift, if you are not a competitive powerlifter, there is no reason to do a deadlift. You don't have to, okay? There are benefits to it, but you can absolutely work around it, especially if you just can't get in the right positions or you always seem to get hurt. It's probably a technique issue, but if you don't want to deadlift, you don't have to deadlift. No movement is necessary for hypertrophy. So if you're having trouble getting in the right positions, I would recommend a rack pull. Try to set it maybe mid-shin, upper shin, probably somewhere below the knee so you can actually get a hinging type of movement rather than just quarter squatting it up. But this is going to get you most of the benefits of a normal deadlift. Next, you can do something like a Romanian deadlift. You can pick it up out of a rack, or you can deadlift it up from the floor for the first rep and then just do reps from there. But this is going to focus more on the hamstrings compared to a normal deadlift. You can't use as much weight, but in this circumstance, it might actually be a good thing because you can focus on just purely hinging back and forth. You're taking the quads pretty much out of it. You're keeping a neutral locked in spine. And so this can be a really, really good way to focus on the posterior chain. But keep in mind, it will make you really sore. Alternatively, you can actually make the movement more challenging. You can add a deficit, you can do stiff-legged deficits, you can use a snatch grip, that kind of thing, in order to increase the range of motion and make it more challenging. For some people, especially if you have, pretty long arms, a normal deadlift, the range of motion is so short that it might not be optimal for hypertrophy. So increasing that range of motion could make it better for hypertrophy. You want to work your back? I would say a bent over row is going to be just as good, if not better, than a deadlift. You could do machine rows, cable rows, chest supported rows, Helms rows. Pull downs, pull ups, those are all going to be really, really good additions to your back training. If you're only doing deadlift for your back, you are definitely missing out on some sweet ass gains. For the lower body, RDLs, as I mentioned, good mornings, back extensions, glute bridges, hip thrusts, single leg work, all that kind of stuff. You can deadlift very sparingly and still improve your deadlift. It's one of those lifts where sometimes avoiding it and focusing on other stuff can actually bring great dividends. Next up, bench press. I would say if you're taking a massive arch, you see some, especially female powerlifters, they're moving the bar like less than half a foot. That is definitely not optimal for hypertrophy. It's optimal for powerlifting, but especially in the extreme, those two things are not the same. So taking a modest arch, not really getting your spine broken in half and just, retracting your scapula, that can be better for hypertrophy. I would also maybe take a closer grip in order to also get more range of motion. You can also modify exactly how you do the movement. A lot of people use huge amounts of leg drive. They are just heaving the bar up, and this is good for performance in a lot of cases, but for hypertrophy, probably not ideal. Again, less arch, more control on the way down, not dumping the bar, keeping that chest up and really focusing on using the pectoral muscles. Also, again, throw in some variations, so incline, decline, dips, cables, dumbbells, machines, all kinds of stuff. This is going to keep you well-rounded and healthy. Yes, if you're doing only barbell bench press for your pushing movement, you might have issues from overuse. Finally, for squats, I would say adding in pauses, again, going slower on the eccentric and really controlling the lowering phase of the movement, staying fairly upright and not letting the hips shift way back and just hamstringing, good morninging, lower backinging the weight up is going to be a good idea. I also think that throwing in variations like an Anderson squat can be good if you are having trouble hitting depth. Just go down to the point where your lower back starts to round, set the pins there, and then just use that range of motion until you can go deeper. Finally, for all three of these, I think that having a more moderate rep range is going to be a good idea. You can still build a lot of strength in the 5 to 10-ish type of area, and it might be more efficient and effective from a hypertrophy standpoint as well. It's also worth noting that you don't need to train to failure on these lifts, and you probably shouldn't. Because they are such big movements, you can keep 2, 3, 4 reps in the tank and still get a lot of benefit from these movements. Whereas in isolation, you're probably better off training closer to failure. So let me know if there's anything I missed.
Miss me.
I never miss.
Anything that wasn't on my list. It's entirely possible that I didn't cover everything. So, all right, that is all for this video. Like, share, subscribe, notifications if that's something that you might. Okay, bye. Peace.